Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Robin Yap, and welcome to an episode of Yap with Dr. Yap. And today we're here with Patrick McGurk. Hey, Patrick, how are you doing today?
I'm well, Robin. Thanks for having me. This is great.
Thank you for being here. Maybe you could tell everyone your background, where you're at right now, and a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So as Robin said, my name is Patrick McGurk, and I'm the Director of Sales with Blanchard Canada, which is part of the Ken Blanchard group of companies. I've been here nearly 7 years, which means I've been in this industry for about 15. So 8 of it with a previous provider. It's been great. I would have to say that I certainly didn't expect to end up here the last 15 years. Over 20 years ago when I went to university, I went to be a teacher. And I quite liked that, but it didn't end up sticking for me. And then I went into advertising, and I worked in advertising for a few years, which was great. But it was a real sort of burnout job, and they didn't treat people well. And then I had some various sales jobs, and I kept encountering, the similar problems, and not at every place, but I would say that I consistently had bosses who didn't really seem to know what they were doing. And I found that very vexing. And I didn't even know that there was an industry that existed where people solely just taught people how to be better bosses. And when a headhunter called me and asked me if I'd be interested in working in this space, it was completely not on my radar. Nothing in my resume really suggested that I would be a good fit for it. But he'd heard through some friends and some mutual acquaintances that I was an interesting person and I might be a good fit. So that's how I ended up. And like I said, I've been doing it now for 15 years. And I think why it really affects me so much is because I had those bad bosses at one point in time, and I just thought I wouldn't wish this on anybody.
That's a great origin story. So that's wonderful. Thanks, Patrick. Now, what are you seeing as the challenges for our professionals now that some of them are probably going back to the office, some are not? There's a whole post-pandemic workplace that has changed from what it used to be.
Yeah, it's certainly added a degree of complexity to developing workplace culture that wasn't there before. A common concern that I hear from my clients is we're afraid of creating a two-class workforce, right? A two-tier workforce. They're worried that the people who are in the office every day, particularly if their leaders are in the office every day, will receive preferential treatment just because of the human nature of recency bias, right? I just saw Robin. Robin's always working so hard every time I see Robin. Robin's so smart. It's time to do some promotions. It's got to be Robin. Completely forgetting that somebody who might not be in the office because they aren't seen every day isn't doing just as good a job as Robin and should be considered as well. So it's a definite fear that they're not going to do the best job they can, both maximizing their talent in a hybrid workplace and recognizing their talent in a hybrid workplace. I would say contrary to most people's belief, companies want to treat their employees well, and they want their employees to succeed. They may not always show that well, and it may not always appear that way to the employee in question, but they don't want to make those mistakes, and those are real concerns. And that's just the selfish side of it. On the more sort of humane and human side, if company culture is aligned that way, then people are just worried about how you feel as an employee who's not, in the workplace. Are you going to feel disconnected? Are you going to feel burned out? Are you going to feel misaligned? They don't want their employees feeling isolated, but at the same time, they want to give them freedom because they recognize those are table stakes in today's workplace, right? I don't think anybody's going to take a job that demands they're there 40 hours a week. They may go 40 hours a week out of preference. There's always some people who are going to want to be in the office. But I think most people have gotten used to the freedom that COVID has provided over the last couple of years and recognize, it's a lot better to go get my license renewed at 2:00 on a Tuesday than it is on a Saturday afternoon when there's 700 of us in line.
That is true. Now, would there be any quick wins that you could suggest for uh, this current challenge that we're facing?
I would say that, as always, and I hate to say this, that there are very few quick wins in the culture game, right? You know, how you build up culture and how you become an employee of choice is always the result of behaviors, which are the result of skills, right? People can't do what they don't know how to do. So if we don't teach them the basic skills that promote certain behaviors, they're not going to exhibit the behaviors we want, which then produce the culture we want. So if we want a culture of inclusivity, and we want a culture where diverse work styles are recognized and appreciated, then we have to make sure that we have a lot of behaviors and skills in place. So what we're working on in the short term is helping people to do a better job in performance management, and not the sort of reactive performance management, but uh, a more progressive and a more forward-thinking performance management, where the check-ins and the dialogue between leaders and their employees occur regardless of where those people are, with a frequency that suits where those people are. So if you find yourself having a ton of informal conversations with Robin because Robin happens to be in the office, you need to be mindful of that. And you need to, say to someone else who's not in the office every day, hey, can we just get 20 minutes to connect? I want to just check in and see what you're doing. And, it's those non-formal one-on-ones, which I think we all find is where we really get to know each other.
Right. Now, are there any tools that you may have or assessments that can potentially identify, what a culture looks like, or where people stand right now with their company status looks like, I guess, so that then they have a pathway to where they want to be?
Yeah, I think, primarily what will happen in our customer engagements is a given company will have started to do that work on their own. So they'll have their engagement surveys, and they'll have their, what we at Blanchard like to call, if they do this, an employee work passion assessment. And what the employee work passion assessment does is it determines discretionary effort. So do you actually really like this job? Are you vested in it? Are you just sort of completing the things that are asked of you, or are you thinking about them, thinking about how to make them better, or how to, improve processes, or how to improve communication or relationships? So if you've started that kind of work as an employer, then it's very easy for us to build a roadmap, identifying what needs to be worked on and what doesn't need to be worked on. Typically the clients we deal with come in with one of two approaches. One's, it's either aspirational, which is most commonly who engages with us, or it's corrective. We've got some problems and we need to fix them. So I wouldn't say it's incumbent on the employee to, provide proof that that's not working, or that there are issues to correct. But I would say that a company should be looking at itself constantly to find out what it needs to do, and what it can't do on its own is when it should engage somebody like us.
Right. Now there's this great reshuffle of all these employees, and all the new companies are all looking for new people. Now that has an impact on culture, and that has an impact on how people behave in the workplace. And therefore, how do you then prepare the leaders of now, post-pandemic, in this environment of constant shuffling? What do you do?
It's funny. Years ago, when I entered this business and we taught concepts around change, it was always like seismic. Like you're implementing a new software system, or you're moving your office, or it was always this feeling like you were working on a single massive project that was going to change the face of the company. And that's how we address change. And I think, everybody that, well, I can see you nodding, you already know where I'm going with this. That's not change, right? Change is that constant. Whether it's large or small, it's always ongoing, and it's never just one thing at a time. We know that really only about, our research shows that 10% of what they do in any given day is brand new in most jobs. So, whether it's your one new process or one new system or one new worker or one new reporter, one new boss, whatever it is, at least, and probably a low number. It's closer to 35%. But say it is 35% of your job is some level of new. So that means you're constantly experiencing change. And how do you handle change? The biggest problem with change is always fear, right? That lack of knowledge, that lack of awareness, and not understanding what's happening. It's why it's happening. Fear is always conquered by information and communication. So how do we best help people, adapt to the turmoil that the great reshuffle is coming? We want to be ahead of that. We don't want to be reacting to it. We want to have a culture of agility and a culture of change where that they know, I know how to handle change because we do it all the time. We know how to communicate it. We know how to assuage people's concerns and fears because we do it all the time.
Now you have new leaders coming in, part of this whole reshuffling. What would be one or two traits, characteristics, competencies that they may need to make sure that they highlight, knowing that there's this whole reshuffling happening?
Yeah, obviously agility is, I think, what everybody's looking for. You don't want someone who is overly reliant on structure. Now, there are, I would always argue, two types of people with a level of high internal structure and people who respond well to external structure. And then the Venn diagram actually overlaps quite a bit, I would say, because people with a high internal structure appreciate other structure and can adapt to it. But you need to understand that, nothing is static. So, the primary thing is, they're not the kind of skills we were talking about in the past. We were talking before about, your planning ability or your budgeting ability or, a lot of things that other people can take off your plate now. Now, as a leader, your responsibilities tend to be much more human. Are you empathic? Are you a good communicator? Are you vulnerable? Are you humble? Are you inclusive? Those were not words, I can even say 15 years ago we were using often, and now we use them every single day. Mm-hmm. So if there were attributes, that's hard to put on a resume, right? You can write that in a sentence and people probably aren't going to maybe absorb it. But, if you have stories and so if you're interviewing or whatever else, or when you're joining a new company, look for those moments where you can repeat things you've done before, where you've been a good communicator, or avoid the times where you haven't been a good communicator, and where you've been empathetic and you've been inclusive and you've been humble and you've been vulnerable, and understand that you have to be curious as well. Mm-hmm. It's not the idea that a leader is the captain of the ship and everything I say goes. That style of leadership, probably doesn't work anywhere outside of the military. And even then, I don't know if it works in the military anymore. You have to get everybody on board with the program. And that's your responsibility. It's your responsibility to be adaptive and to meet people where they are.
Right. Now, my thinking, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that at some point, this whole post-pandemic reality becomes normalized, and that's now normal.
Sure.
When that, we need to also be prepared for that. What do you think we need to do to make sure that when we do get there, that we are in an organization where, we have empathic leaders and we have leaders who are inclusive, etc.?
One thing I would say is if you're finding yourself in a workplace where that's not the case, don't be afraid to move on. The war for talent right now is extreme. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of people who are gigging now at a compensation level that works for them because their entire budget is not what it was 2 years ago. Maybe they don't have that big house in the city that they used to have, and maybe they've moved out to a small town or whatever else they have. So, people who you might have been competing for with jobs, you're not competing for anymore. And your accomplishment and your skills are your own, and don't be afraid to take ownership of them and present them that way. So if you do find yourself in a place where you can't affect change to make it, like that, and that should be a reasonable expectation of a workplace, that it is a safe place. We talk a lot about psychological safety, and psychological safety is not a skill you teach, but it's the result of a series of behaviors, right? And that's a cultural aspect. So if you're not in a workplace that's like that, and we all are terrified of change, but don't be afraid to go look elsewhere. If you're in the position where you're lucky enough to affect change, for example, if you're an L&D leader, like some of the people in this audience might be, then you have to know how to make your case to the stakeholders who matter and show them why things need to change.
Right. That's great. This is a lot to process, I'm sure. And thank you so much for your time and providing us all your wisdom on this. So thanks a lot, Patrick. And any last words for our audience as they're trying to figure out what's going to happen in their world, whether it's leaders or employees, as we're all going back to the workplace? What would that wisdom be?
You know what? My wife has a great line, and I really think she should write a book on it. And when she looks back at her own career, she says, all the successes I've achieved were because I didn't stay in my own lane. So I would encourage anybody, don't label yourself. I would say don't stay in your own lane. Look for opportunities that interest you, intrigue you, and places that interest you, intrigue you, and you will have zero regrets when you look back on it.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time and chatting with us and chatting with our audience. Thank you. Thanks,
My
Patrick.
pleasure.